This is an exam room with two different phoropter types, the auto phoropter here and the standard manual phoropter. Typically when I exchange phoropters, there's actually very little serviceable parts. These are serviceable parts on the auto phoropter. It's electronic and sealed. The standard phoropter is not sealed. To remove a phoropter from the stand, typically the first step is on the underside of the arm is a slotted set screw, and basically you remove that set screw completely, then loosen this knob and then slide off the phoropter, which weighs about 12 pounds. So you have to be ready to hold some weight as you're sliding it off. It's a good idea to lock the arm before removing it. Now with the set screw removed, just loosen this knob and then slide it off. Again, about 12 pounds, so you don't want to do it carelessly. You have to be ready for the weight. And then to put it back in place, it's just a reverse procedure, but then you've got to find the hole underneath there and get it centered before you can get the set screw back in place. So the trick when putting the screw back in is to sight the position of the screw hole, and once it's centered in that bracket, then you can pretty much line up the screw to fit in place. And it's best not to leave the screw partially screwed in. It pretty much disappears inside that bracket when it's fully tightened. So here you can see the screw is actually inset into the bracket, and this keeps the phoropter from accidentally falling off. If you were to loosen this knob without the set screw, you could loosen this knob by mistake, and then this 12-pound phoropter could drop on the patient or drop on the floor and be severely damaged. So the set screw is important for a safety standpoint. And don't lose the screw because it costs $9 or $10 for each one of these screws. It's very special threaded, custom-made screw that fits just in this arm. I haven't found a matching thread in a hardware store. Okay, most manual phoropters, once you get them back on, have a near-point rod, which I use to level out the slit lamp. When this knob is loosened, you can get some degree of leveling by letting the phoropter level itself out, and then typically I tighten the knob and then adjust the bubble here so it's in the middle. The phoropter is fairly well balanced so that when you let it swing back and forth, it'll pretty much come to a good position. Then it's approximately level. Usually what I do is I put in the near point rod, put it horizontal, and then level the position of the near point rod with respect to landmarks in the exam room. So this is the lineup method I typically use. I insert the near point rod, tighten up the screw here, and then check to see if it's relatively level with respect to some landmark in the room. So, you know, looking at that picture frame, for example, it's relatively horizontally level. And then the other thing is it should be able to point pretty much towards where the screen is at the end of the room, and then the bubble is in the middle there. So if it's not lined up, so it's pointing the wrong direction, so you have this knob loosened, you get it level, and with the other hand you tighten the knob. And then once it's level like that, you use the knob here to bring the bubble to the middle. And that's in the standard alignment for the phoropter for use in refracting. To To remove an autophoropter and put a manual phoropter in its place is a little bit more complicated than swapping out a manual phoropter. The main thing is there's an electronic cable going into this compartment, and you have to remove the cable usually just basically by pushing up on the panel here. And then this cable removes by squeezing in these two metal tabs on the side. And interesting enough, behind the cable is a serial number for the autophoropter, which otherwise is not visible on the outside. So you remove this cable, and then the same story, before you handle this, you want to remove the near point rod. And then the same story, you have to remove the set screw here, which is underneath the phoropter arm. You remove this set screw completely with a screwdriver, and then loosen this knob, and then the phoropter slides off completely, and be ready for about 10-12 pounds, the weight of the phoropter, when you remove the autophoropter. And then the manual phoropter goes in place the same way by sliding on the phoropter, lining up the set screw, snugging it up in place, and then leveling it. This cable, if you're going to be using a manual phoropter, can then be sort of taped out of place, so it's not an annoyance while you're trying to refract with a manual phoropter. Putting the autophoropter back together is just the same process reversed. Lining up the computer cable. Snaps back in place. Then this cable has to line up over this notch in the plastic. Putting this piece of plastic in place, and then pushing downward until it snaps in place. The autophoropter is very different. There's no controls on the autophoropter itself other than the leveling mechanism, which is this knurled knob, the near point rod, and then this to push out the forehead rest adjustment by turning this knob in the front. That's about the only controls on the autophoropter itself. The rest of the controls are on this laptop unit, which then controls the sphere, cylinder, axis positions, the separation between the two banks. So now if you're going to do retinoscopy, the retinoscopy tends not to work very well because there's no controls on here. Usually the doctor is looking through here at the patient's eyes and changing the settings on the phoropter while looking at the patient's eyes to get the eye into focus for the scope. Here with no controls, you really can't do that. You end up having to set the sphere, do the lensometry, set the axis, the cylinder power, do the retinoscopy, go back, set the cylinder axis, check the retinoscopy, and you're sort of turning the knob while you're doing this, and it really doesn't work very well because it's just so discoordinated. So there's some things that work better with a manual phoropter. The oculars here are lower on the phoropter, on the autophoropter, than on the standard manual phoropter. So it typically works better to have the autophoropter on the top and the manual phoropter right below it. This is a lever which, when loosened, can allow this phoropter arm to be lifted up or lifted down. Now, with the phoropter on it, it weighs like 30 pounds. The same tool can then go into the screw here to loosen it, to lower the phoropter, so that if you get a wheelchair patient, which this room is equipped for a wheelchair glide, you slide the chair back, slide in the wheelchair, and then you can lower this arm down to the patient to do a refraction on a wheelchair patient, which then would be sitting much lower towards the ground, and you can't really raise up the wheelchair to reach the phoropter, so you got to lower the phoropter down to reach the wheelchair patient. And this then has enough play to allow you to do that. So each of the phoropters has a serial number on it, and I have a reference sheet where for each exam room at each location, I have the serial number and the electronic inventory number of each phoropter in each room, and that way I can get the original phoropter back to each room after I've serviced them. And there's no question as to where it goes, where it came from, and where it goes back to. I'm ready to go on an equipment trip. And with this style of car, I'm able to put the seats flat, and inside each of these 5 boxes can carry as many as 2 phoropters. There's actually 9 phoropters, a total of 9 loaner phoropters, which are loaded in here. When I carry the phoropters into a facility, I can stack up to 3 of these boxes at one time on this cart and then secure them with bungee cords. The box for storing and transporting the phoropters starts out as a heavy-duty, letter-legal storage box. To make it water-resistant, I actually coated it with plastic package sealing tape on the top and sides. I also reinforced the bottom by putting a piece of 1/4-inch plywood basically glued and taped to the bottom of the box. What that helps with is when it's sitting on the carrying cart, it tends to push in the bottom of the box, but with a rigid wooden bottom, it doesn't push in the bottom. It holds the bottom flat, so it doesn't push inside the box with the bottom of the cart. I reinforced the top of the box by actually gluing a same size piece of cardboard to the inside of the box, which then makes the lid a little stronger than the usual single layer cardboard. And you can see it there where it's glued in place. I just makes the top a little thicker. Then to keep dust and fingerprints off a phoropter, I transport them inside a paper grocery bag. When it gets too beaten up, this one's getting near the end. When I get too beaten up, then I replace the paper bag with a new one. Then the phoropter sits on top of a piece of cushioning foam, which this is like a mattress cushioning foam, so the phoropter is not straight on a piece of wood. Then next, there's a tray inside so I can put a phoropter underneath. I cut these handholds in it. This is another piece of 1/4-inch plywood with 4 2x2s screwed to the wood at the corners. As you can see, it's a 4-inch height of the 2x2. On the bottom of the box is a similar thing. There's a foam pad, and then the bottom of the box, which is just the box as is, plus the reinforcing plywood. And that's the setup for transporting. This is a rack which I designed. It holds the Phoropter, and I move it to the height that works for working on this. It holds a clamp lamp, which lights up the Phoropter lenses so I can see what needs to be cleaned. I have a compact, I think this is like a 9-inch diagonal compact TV set, which I use to play usually previously viewed videos for entertainment, so I can listen to what's going on while I'm cleaning lenses endlessly for hours and hours on end. And basically I've got some cable wires I transmit to this TV from either the DVD player there or DVD player there, and I actually have a long cable I transmit from that TV set through all these connections, and they end up over at this TV set. So if I'm going to watch it live or watch a playback from one of these sources, I don't really watch it much, mainly listen to it. Before I clean the lens of the Phoropter, I disassemble the Phoropter. Here I was able to do a setup where I can flip the clamp lamp around and move the rack forward. I put down a towel and I take apart the Phoropter one bank at a time, and then I put it back together again, do the other side, and then I take apart the JCC and use 3-in-1 oil to lubricate the mechanism so that it moves easily between the power and axis setting. If not lubricated, eventually gets to have a lot of resistance here. So I lubricate all the parts of the Phoropter, clean the inside of the Phoropter, put it back together again, check the reading rod yoke for resistance, make sure nothing's abnormal about the functioning of the tonometer, servicing whatever needs to be done. And then once it's all completed, I hang it back on the rack here and clean the Phoropter lenses by shining the light through them. Now this bar, you can see it's held on by various clamps. This bar is actually a Schwinn biking seat post. I got an extra long version. This is about 15 inches long. And I designed this rack which holds this clamp lamp so that it slides along the bike post, which then moves the light from one ocular to the other. So I can light up the left bank when I'm cleaning the left bank, and then light up the right bank when I'm cleaning the right bank lenses. I designed this so I can actually take it apart and change the height, which I've changed the height over the years. This is a fan that I use to speed up evaporation while cleaning the phoropter lenses. I found it's very helpful to have a fan blowing air across the lenses so that as I wipe up the dirt schmutz from the lenses, this evaporates the fluid and the cleaning process goes quicker. So usually the fan on low is sufficient to speed that evaporation process. An extra little light that I shine from the back, which helps the process. The other thing I found is useful is, so I don't have to work in a totally dark room, I get better contrast on the lenses with a black piece of paper as a background from the lens viewing. So the light is shining in from the side. So the light from the clamp lamp is shining in from the side, and then there's black paper beyond, which then enhances the contrast of what I'm looking for to clean up the phoropter lens. Otherwise, what is useful to work in a totally dark room, but then you can't see the surfaces on both sides. So it's actually useful to have some light on both sides of the lens, but black beyond. And it's much better contrast than when there's white beyond. It just really lights up the defects so I know what I've got to clean. This clutter in here is actually an array of useful tools, because you never know what you're going to need to take apart a phoropter. Well, actually you do know, but as you're starting out, you have to figure out what's needed. Just an array of some of the tools I will end up using for disassembly of the phoropters, or running into some unusual part that I need to work on if there's some malfunction. But I just keep all these things packed into this little set of tools cluttering over here. The latest addition to the work area, which I added a few years ago, is an under-the-table exercise machine. So this is like a bicycle pedal exercise thing. I put my feet in these two things, and I'm pedaling like a bicycle while I'm cleaning phoropter lenses on the top. So my legs are staying busy and getting a minimal amount of exercise. In order to fit this under this table, these are little racks that are designed to elevate a bed off the floor. Well, I've got the four legs of the table sitting on that rack, which raises the table to a height that I can move my legs underneath the table, and then I have to have a chair elevated enough so that I can sit fairly comfortably in this position. So this is a slightly larger table. It's like 2.5 feet by 5 feet, I believe it is, which holds tools, work area, fan, whatever I feel like I need. And I have access to a computer in my work area, and another one as needed for billing and such. So this is the main reason I have the rack. After I finish the cleaning and soaking of the JCC mechanism, I then left a piece of tissue in here, prop the Phoropter upright so that any residual oil can drain into the tissue at the bottom of the JCC mechanism. Then I leave it hang for at least 2 hours, and then I reassemble the JCC. For the cleaning of the Phoropter lenses, again, this is the setup so I can visualize the lens. And once I'm done with the left bank, I close that off and then slide the light over to the other side, and then I clean the lenses on this side. Then once I'm done cleaning all the Phoropters in a group that I've picked up, I pack them all up in the boxes, take them back in the car, put them on the rolling cart, and then I make sure that the proper serial number gets into the proper exam room it came from. So here we have 59480. I have a list of Phoropters that go in various facilities. So here's 59480 goes back into room 4 at the Woodlawn facility. And I basically duck in between patients and line up the Phoropter on the stand, take away my loaner Phoropter, and then move on to the next facility when I'm, say, done with Woodlawn. The next facility I'm going to is North Arundel, and take all the loaner Phoropters and go to that facility, and then return home with those to be serviced. So this facility, Woodlawn, has Marco Autophoropters in each of the rooms, and additionally they have a second Phoropter arm below the Autophoropter, which has a manual Phoropter, except for room 5, which they didn't have enough Phoropters to go around. That's how those facilities are equipped. There's some other facilities that don't have 2 Phoropter arms when they have an Autophoropter, so if they have to do a retinoscopy, they're stuck. The other part of timing that's useful, if I can arrange it, is to arrive at the facilities during their lunch hour so I can duck into each exam room, swap out the Phoropters, and not have to wait in between each patient, so that I'll, if I can time it, so I arrive at Woodlawn, for example, during their lunch hour, I can swap out their Phoropters that I'm returning, and then leave without having to wait in between each patient being seen. Then when I move to the next facility, the timing is off. Except when I return to, let's say, North Arundel, I'll try to align that with their lunch hour, so I don't have to wait to get in between patients, but it doesn't always work out that way. I maintain over 130 manual type Phoropters each year at 16 different facilities. So I've got a 5-page listing of all the Phoropters, all the serial numbers, and all the facilities where they go.